Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello, and welcome to News from the Torah. Today is the 11th day of the Hebrew month of Cheshvan, the 17th of October 2021. And this week, we're reading the Torah portion of Vayera. I'm Leah Havroni, and I welcome you to today's show. The portion of Vayera continues to take us along Avram's journey and Avram's life story. And it crescendos with the sacrifice of Yitzchak, or the expected sacrifice of Yitzchak. Of course, in the end, Avram does not sacrifice Yitzchak, but it's a trust of his principles and his dedication to the service of God. And this is going to be the main theme of today's show. How do we practice self-sacrifice in this day and age when nobody really needs you to sacrifice yourself? The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to say that in the previous generations, Jews were supposed to sacrifice their life, those of their children, for Judaism. Today, nobody cares. So you can do whatever you want. You don't have to sacrifice yourself. Today, we need to sacrifice our will. We need to align our will with that of the will of God. But actually, in these past couple of years, there have been new opportunities for self-sacrifice, and we will discuss one of those, a story like that, just from this past week. Today is also the Yortzeit, the day of the passing of Rachel Imenu, our foremother Rachel, and we will draw on her lessons, on the lessons of her life, as well as the lessons of her sister Leah, Rachel and Leah, to learn more about the challenges and the opportunities to leverage those challenges to grow spiritually and personally. This coming Tuesday, I will lead a group of women for a workshop on leveraging our difficulties to grow spiritually at the resting place of Rachel, at Kever Rachel. And you're welcome to join us in person or over Zoom. The information is in the description of the show, so you're welcome to come along. And finally, I will also share a personal story. My daughter got married 10 days ago, and she and our new son-in-law are taking a very unique and interesting path that requires quite a sacrifice for their love of Torah and their love of Torah learning. So I will share all of that after the break. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Zapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back. So the Jewish holidays are behind us, and the time after the holidays, called after the Chagim in Israel, is also behind us. For the past several months, we've been promising ourselves that after the Chagim, after the holidays, we will get back to our routine, and we'll be sure to get in on the action on the various things we want to achieve. So this time of after the Chagim is also behind us, and we have now settled into a routine. And our biggest challenge becomes to keep sight of everything we have promised ourselves during the holidays. All the spiritual work we want to do, all the spiritual achievements we want to accomplish this year, and all the practical things we told ourselves we're going to do after the holidays. So now we need to keep sight of those if we want to turn this year into a year of growth, even as we live our day-to-day routines. And the first major event of the year after the holidays is the date of the passing of Rachel Imenu, our foremother Rachel. Like a loving mother, she's right here. She welcomes us into this new year, and she invites us to stop by her on her day of passing, her Yortzeit, which is today, before we go off on this year's journey. There's something very special about Rachel. Our sages teach us that she died and was buried on the side of the road, not at the cave of the patriarchs in Hebron, but in Bethlehem at the side of the road, so that when her children leave Israel to go into exile, they would be able to pass by her resting place and pray to God and ask her to intervene on their behalf. And the sages also teach us that when God decided to destroy the temple and send the Jewish people into exile, none of the prayers and the requests and the interventions of the other forefathers and foremothers of Moshe Rabbeinu, none of those helped. But the one who did help, the one who did get the promise out of God to return her children back to Israel and to bring an end to an exile was Rachel. And what is that special quality of Rachel? What is that special power that she has that enabled her to get that promise from God to bring the exile to an end and to bring her kids back to the land of Israel? The sages teach us in a book called Tana Debei Eliyahu that each one of the two foremothers, Rachel and Leah, had a different kind of life mission. They say as follows: Rachel, quote unquote, grabbed the spindle of silence, and all of her children had the special quality of being able to stay silent and keep secrets when necessary. In contrast, Leah grabbed the spindle of praise, and all of her children had the ability to praise and acknowledge the truth. So, what is the spindle of silence that Rachel grabbed? We know the story of Rachel, that she was supposed to marry Yaakov, and Yaakov worked for 7 years tending the sheep, the flock of Lavan, Rachel's father, in exchange for the ability to marry Rachel after 7 years. But on the night of the wedding, Lavan exchanged Rachel for Leah. Leah was older and married Yaakov off to Leah. Now Rachel knew that this was going to happen, and Yaakov also expected that this might happen. He did not trust Lavan entirely. So Rachel and Yaakov had a set of signs that they shared, and Rachel would give those signs to Yaakov, and he would know that she's his wife. Now Rachel saw that Leah was being led to marry Yaakov, and she did not want her to be ashamed or embarrassed. So she took those signs, those agreed code words, and passed them on to Leah so that she could share them with Yaakov, and Yaakov would think that Leah is Rachel. So what happened here is not silence. Actually, Rachel and Yaakov had a secret, and Rachel did not keep the secret. She diverted it to Leah, and she enabled Lavan to trick Yaakov in this way. But the sages actually share a little bit different story than the one that the Torah presents. And the story goes back 7 years to the time that Yaakov and Rachel met and agreed to get married. After that, Yaakov would send Rachel presents, and he would send them through her father, the way there was, I guess, customary at the time. But Lavan would take those presents and give them to Leah and tell her, look, Yaakov, your intended groom, sent you a present. And Leah was sure that Yaakov is sticking around to marry her and not Rachel. And Rachel saw this, and she kept silent so as not to embarrass her sister. And this went on for 7 years. And now on the wedding night, she shared with Leah the laws of family purity, challah, and lighting Shabbat candles that were customary in Yaakov's house that Yaakov taught Rachel. These were the signs, the agreed upon code words. And she shared them casually just so Leah would know that this is what happens at Yaakov's house. So when Yaakov asked about them, Leah had all the information. And then after the wedding, Leah never knew that she was in tool in the deception. She always thought Yaakov was meant for her. And this went on after the wedding too. And it's very clear when later in the story, Rachel asks Leah to give her the flowers brought by Leah's son Reuven. So Leah answers Rachel, not only did you take my husband, but you want my child's flowers too? This makes no sense if Leah knew that Yaakov and Rachel were supposed to get married first. It's clear that Leah never knew that Yaakov and Rachel meant to get married. So we usually think of Rachel as performing this one heroic deed on the night of the wedding and giving up the secrets to Leah so she would not be embarrassed. But the way Chazal tell us, it wasn't a one-time deal. Rachel did not perform one heroic deed. She heroically kept the secret for her entire 21 years, from the time that Yaakov showed up on the doorstep until the day that she died, and she took her secret with her into the grave. And this is why our sages call it that she grabbed the spindle of silence. A spindle is a stick on which you make thread. You take wisps of wool and you tie them together, or you twist them together to make a long, long thread. Rachel's entire life was one long thread of silence, made up of moments of silence, wisps of silence. She had to bite that secret back thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times. It almost slipped out, and she kept it back. It almost slipped out, and she kept it back. So her whole life was this thread of silence made up of moments. And the same is true of Leah. Leah marries Yaakov thinking that she is his intended wife. And then a week later, Yaakov also marries Rachel, and he favors Rachel over Leah. So Leah must have been devastated. Like any new bride would. Why would he take on another wife a week later and favor her over me? And the names of Leah's children reflect that. Reuven. The meaning of this name is that anybody can see her sadness and her sorrow. And then the next one is Shimon. You can't see the sadness, but you can hear it. It's a little bit less distinct. And then the next one is Levi. It's neutral. There's no sadness there. And then the fourth child, Yehudah, Leah says, this time I'm going to thank God. And our sages say that Leah was the first person in the Torah to actually thank God. And with every additional child, her strength and her joy and her happiness grow stronger. Leah chose to let go of the pain and to embrace thankfulness and acknowledgement of God's goodness. It was also a choice made moment by moment by moment by moment, creating a thread of life that was all about acknowledging God's goodness and thankfulness. And it's a trait that she developed in herself, just like Leah, just like Rachel, from wisps of moments of thankfulness and positive attitude, creating this thread of a lifetime. And both of these incredible women passed these character traits on to their children because they developed them with such devotion and everyday work. And this is a great lesson for us. First of all, that there are different paths to serving God. Rachel's path was inward of silence. Leah's path was outward of praise and speech. Yet each one of these paths is valid. Each one of us needs to find his or her path in serving Hashem, in serving God. We all have our unique mission in life, and we need to embrace that mission. It doesn't matter what other people's missions are. Ours is unique and could be very, very different. And God sends each one of us unique challenges and opportunities that signal what He wants from us. And we also need to have the perseverance. Rachel and Leah showed us how we can utilize every moment to grow in our personal development, so that over many years we can spin the thread of a lifetime dedicated to doing God's will. All of this happens during the mundane moments of routine, when you bite your tongue from another word of criticism or gossip, when you choose to look for the silver lining in a difficult situation, when you take that extra effort to say a kind word to a child or a coworker or a spouse or a sibling, when you set aside your perfectionism and give yourself the time to rest and recharge. These little decisions ultimately make up a lifetime, and they're just as glorious as the amazing holidays of Tishrei. Stay put, we'll be right back after these messages.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back. So, as part of our discussion this week about personal choices, principles, and values, and the prices that people are willing to pay to uphold these, I would like to share something very personal. My second daughter got married 10 days ago to a wonderful young man, and this young couple are planning on going into full-time, long-term Torah learning. The young man will be studying in yeshiva almost full-time. And this is what you call the kollel lifestyle. Kollel is an institution for married men where they study the Torah full-time. And this lifestyle is a little bit controversial because some people think that these young men are not productive. They don't make money. They don't earn money. But they dedicate their life to Torah. And people who don't see the value in learning Torah full-time don't appreciate this lifestyle. However, this couple did decide to go ahead with this lifestyle. And I would like to talk for a few minutes about the motivation. What is it that motivates young people to dedicate their life to studying Torah full-time and paying the financial, economic, and sometimes social price? In some circles, this is a default decision, but this was not so for my son-in-law and my daughter. They did not grow up in a community where this is a social norm. It was not expected of them, and they did not choose this path due to any peer or family pressure, and certainly not out of lack of options for academic and professional success. And the young man has served in the Israel Defense Forces. So army conscription considerations did not enter the equation. As this idealistic, bright-eyed couple looked inward to see if this is the right decision for them, they consulted with friends, weighed the pros and cons, discussed different income options, and talked over possible future scenarios. And their excitement became contagious and inspiring. In the past, whenever I was asked to speak about the Haredi community and kollel families, I usually emphasized just how normal, quote-unquote, the Haredi community is, and how the kollel experience is just a subset of the otherwise gainfully employed community. After all, just in Israel, there are 1.2 million Haredim and only about 80,000 married men who are in yeshiva studying full-time. And this argument still holds true, and these numbers are still relevant, but I have decided that I'm not going to cite them anymore. Using this argument is a disservice both to the Torah learners and to the people trying to understand them, and a much better argument and a much better way to explain the kollel lifestyle is actually help people understand what motivates some people to go into kollel. And watching my newlyweds helped me develop a new appreciation for this, for why people go into long-term Torah study. So some people, like I said, consider the kollel lifestyle to be unproductive, and the men who learn Torah as time-wasting bums who could be working and earning money instead. And others are concerned about the implications for the national economy. I keep hearing people say, I don't want my tax dollars to go to support kollel men. If they want to support themselves, fine. So just to get this argument out of the way, somebody crunched numbers recently, and an average kollel student gets a 1,750 shekel stipend. That's about $250 a month. It comes out to less than 10 shekels or $3 a year per person. So if somebody thinks that it's their tax dollars that are contributing to the problem, that their tax dollars are being used for wasteful Torah study, yeah, $3. This is what you are giving over. This is what you're contributing to Torah study. And then, of course, there's also the famous Rambam. The Rambam, the preeminent Jewish codifier of law, writes in his code that nobody is allowed to use the Torah as a digging spade. And people are not allowed to learn Torah in order to earn money, which makes a lot of sense. The same Rambam, in a different place in his code, writes that the tribe of Levi decided to dedicate itself exclusively to the service of God. And they were supported by the rest of the Jewish people. And he writes that today any person can choose to become part of this tribe of Levi and dedicate himself or herself exclusively to the service of God and learning Torah. So there's two statements from the Rambam are used by the opposite sides, and I think it's really relevant. I think what we need to understand is that people who go to learn Torah full-time, most of them, are not doing it for their honor. They're not doing it to make money, because certainly they do not. It's not a cushy, comfortable, luxurious lifestyle for most people. And I also understand, for the purposes of this discussion, that some people don't see any return on investment. They don't see the ROI of going into learning for 5, 10, 15 years. Like, what's the point and what's the societal contribution? So personally for me, I really cannot imagine living without Torah. I cannot understand how people can go through the trials and tribulations of life without having the Torah's wisdom to guide and support them. After 10 years of academic training and research, as well as professional work, coaching thousands of people and organizations, it has become quite clear to me that the teachings of the Torah and of our sages give us the mindset and the tools for personal development, self-esteem, connection, and emotional health that are unmatched by anything else out there. Literally every new method, trend, outlook I'm encountering in the secular coaching and emotional health world can be traced back to a teaching in the Talmud, Musar, or Chassidut. However, watching my newlyweds has been a visceral lesson in what love of Torah truly looks like. When they talk about Torah ideas, their eyes light up. Torah learning is not just an intellectual pursuit, it's a deep emotional engagement as well. Learning nurtures their soul and makes them happy, individually and together. And the closest analogy I can think of is art. For a musician or a painter, art is life. Much more than the talent, it's this emotional connection to the art that enables artists to commit to the long years, the painstaking labor, and the prices that art so often requires. An artist unable to connect with her art fills a deep void that cannot be filled by anything else. I find this to be true for many Torah scholars as well. The Or Chaim HaKadosh, a 17th century Moroccan commentator on the Torah, writes that, quote, if people would feel the sweetness and the goodness of Torah, they would go crazy with excitement after it. An entire world of gold and silver would mean nothing to them, since the Torah includes all that is good in the world. Yes, there are people out there who feel this way. There are people out there who feel that the Torah fulfills them emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, on such a deep level that they want to commit their entire life to learning Torah. Maybe you don't feel this way. Maybe you can't wrap your head around people having a consuming yearning for learning Torah. Maybe this whole sweetness and emotional connection business doesn't speak to you. And that's fine, and that's valid. What I'm asking you to do, though, is to let go of judgment and consider a possibility that some people truly experience these feelings. Can you find the generosity of spirit to honor the experience? Can you identify with the desire to live a life of authenticity and alignment with one's most central values, even if these values are different from yours? This young couple does not know how long they plan on keeping up with full-time Torah study. Right now, they view it as an indefinite commitment, and they will reevaluate it and when the circumstances so require. But I don't think it's the time frame or the years that matter. I pray that they always retain that spark and love for Torah and the idealism to seek out their own truth, and the willingness to pay prices in terms of their economic future and prosperity, in terms of the young man's ability to go get academic training and a profession, something that would bring him social esteem and quite a high salary, is very admirable in my eyes, because he's going ahead with his truth and what is right for him, and does not pay attention to what the society, quote unquote, expects from him. And I pray for all of us that we have the same courage, authenticity, clarity, and commitment to pursue our own paths in God's world, whatever those paths may be. This is the quintessential lesson of Avraham Avinu, of our forefather Avraham, who went with his principles and values all the way to the end. And there's one more thing I'd like to suggest. If you go online, you can Google Nikki Imber's bronze statue called Love of Torah. Nikki Imber, I-M-B-E-R, and the bronze statue is called Love of Torah. It's a bronze statue of a chassid hugging a Torah scroll with immense emotion in his eyes. And this statue that is online really embodies the emotions that I'm feeling so many Torah scholars have towards learning Torah. So once again, that might not be your experience, but it is theirs. And let's collectively support that authenticity, that truth, and that value that the Torah brings to our life. Stay put, we will be right back.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Bentako, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany is but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
Welcome back to the final segment of today's episode as we talk about self-sacrifice and standing up for our principles and values. And the last story I would like to share with you is literally from this past Thursday. It is a story of Iris Portugali, an Israeli drummer, and the dean of the very prestigious Rimon Academy of Contemporary Music here in Israel. Now, Miss Portugali decided to resign from her post in order to protest the Green Pass mandate that has been established by the Israeli government and adopted by the Academy of Music. The Green Pass means that you need to either have 3 shots of the vaccine or perform daily antigen tests in order to be able to attend the school or to teach in it. The same goes for people who have natural immunity, who have been sick, and even have antibodies. It doesn't matter. You still need to have a shot if you've been recovered for 6 months and over. So to protest this Green Pass mandate, the dean of the school decided to resign after a 30-year career at the school and 7 years at its academic head. So it doesn't really matter what you think about the medical side of a vaccine. You can have your opinions, pro or con. The issue here is the civil liberties and the cavalier manner in which the government is treating its contract with the citizens. The government feels empowered to give or take our rights at will. And today you may think this to be justifiable in light of the pandemic. And I'm not going to argue with that. You have the perfect right to have that opinion. But tomorrow, the same precedent will be used to take your civil rights over something else where you don't think it to be justifiable. And people don't usually think so far ahead. So I would really like to commend Mrs. Portugali on this move. Even if you think that she's misguided, I think it takes a special strength of character to walk away from a plum job and the top position in her field for something that you believe in. And that's a strength of character that we received from Avraham Avinu, our forefather. I would like to read a post that she posted the other day about the feedback that she has gotten to her decision. So I'm translated from Hebrew, and I'm just going to read it as is. And this is Mrs. Portugali writing. Yesterday, I posted a farewell post from Rimon Academy, my home for the past 30 years, in light of their choice to adhere to the Green Pass policy. The amount of support, the sympathetic reactions, the shares, the love really struck me with astonishment. Not just me. I realize that this is not the whole picture of what's out there. It is clear to me that there are other voices as well, angry voices. What has changed, and why is this so encouraging? This time around, after a year and a half of slander, the balance of power is beginning to change. Resigning out of disagreement to cooperate with government regulations is no longer heresy. It is becoming legitimate. The public has had its say. And what are my expectations? They're very sober. I have no expectation that the academia will back down from its decisions to enforce the Green Pass tomorrow morning. I do not expect that the mainstream media will have a turnaround and start giving us fair coverage. I have no expectation that the trade unions, those of the musicians and the artists, the teachers' union, the workers' organizations, will get off their butts from their plush chairs and engage in any struggle. And I have no expectations that the music halls and the halls of culture, the theaters, will raise their heads and say, enough is enough. What do I expect? That more and more people will start asking questions and demanding answers. Because something crucial happened here sometime in March 2020, when a critical mass of citizens agreed to shut their mouths and pinch their noses without turning the world upside down and demanding transparency. It was a change in the contract between the government and its citizens. Instead of saying, wait, no problem, we will consider breathing less for another 30 years once you publicize the protocols of the government meetings leading to the decision to vaccinate. Almost all of us went along irresponsibly, handing over to a corrupt government the keys to our bodies. And just to clarify, this is me, Leah, interjecting. the Israeli government protocols deciding to vaccinate the citizens with the Pfizer vaccine are sealed as top secret for the next 30 years. And the Pfizer contract has entire clauses blacked out so that the citizenry does not really know what has been agreed upon with Pfizer. And Mrs. Portugali will allude to this in a minute. So back to her post. From there, the slope has been slippery. We are expected to inject with closed eyes the solution to the problem without first requiring any transparency. Where is the contract with Pfizer? Why does it have blacked out clauses? This is stunning. It was forbidden to ask questions and demand answers. Thousands of vaccine victims are silenced and ridiculed, and the public is out on its own without any information. And once again, this is Milea interjecting. Last week, over 10,000 citizens commented on a Ministry of Health Facebook post with personal stories of side effects from the vaccine. And the Ministry of Health removed over 10,000 comments like this from the post. So this was seen and screenshot, and people actually uploaded hospital documentation about vaccines as hospitalizations. And the Ministry of Health just wiped that off the post. Over 10,000 comments. So this has been a watershed moment in Israel's relationship with the Ministry of Healthcare and the vaccine mandate. Back to Portugali's post. Thousands of vaccine victims are silenced and ridiculed, and the public is out on its own. You're expected not to see, not to hear, not to check, and not to ask. There are people whose lives have been ruined, and they're ashamed to share their stories. They fear public lynching. How did we get here? So now I'm both surprised by the unexpected feedback and comforted by the amount of love after a year and a half of loneliness. And I call on all of us, regardless of vaccination status. Let's return sovereignty to the citizens. Let's start asking questions again. Let's start requiring answers. Let's investigate. Let's open our minds. Let's refuse to be enemies. And thank you to each and every one of you for your support. I have a feeling I'm just the first drop in this wonderful tidal wave that's returning. Mrs. Portugali's post got over 3,500 likes and many, many shares. And I think she's the first person of consequence, the first public figure that I can think of who decided to resign in Israel over the Green Pass mandate. The Green Pass that the Ministry of Health has admitted has nothing to do with epidemiology and protection from corona, and everything to do with forcing people to vaccinate. Now, I've said it a gazillion times, and I'm going to say it once again. If people need to vaccinate because it makes health sense for them, for the situation, especially people who are older or have pre-existing conditions, for sure, it's a medical decision that they need to make with the doctor, and that's fine. It is the mandate and the lack of transparency and the lies and the lack of research on safety issues and this mantra that the vaccine is safe and reliable and nothing can ever go wrong, that is actually preventing people from taking the vaccine and maybe getting the protection that they need, because people have lost trust in the Ministry of Healthcare and in the healthcare system. Just last week, I actually spoke to our community doctor. He's a community family doctor, a regular GP who works for an HMO. And he told us that every 3 days, he gets 20 pages of new protocol about corona and the vaccine. He's supposed to read that protocol and do exactly as he's told. And his hands are tied. He can't do anything different from what the protocol requests. And I have heard over the past few weeks quite a few stories of people turning to their doctors. If it's pregnant women going to their OBGYNs, if it's just people going to their family doctors, and the doctor saying, we can't do anything. go call the HMO and see what the HMO can help you with. We have instructions on how to treat you and what to do. They're not giving out information. They're not giving information about things like monitoring your oxygen levels if you're sick, something that absolutely can save lives, because they're not mandated to do that. They're mandated to tell you to go get the vaccine. And there's nothing wrong with the vaccine, but it's one way of treating a disease. It's not the only way. It's actually not a way of treating the disease. There are many treatments that are available and monitoring situations that are not giving out to the citizenry. So I find Mrs. Portugali's post to be enlightening and illuminating, and I absolutely agree with her. This is the first drop in a tidal wave of people starting to ask questions, demand transparency, demand their civil rights back. It takes courage and dedication, but we have been practicing those for over 3,000 years since Avraham Avinu. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next week right here. Have a great week.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.